A Duvid here. We are live commentary on the World Crazy House Championship. So sorry, just getting my tech together. And so here we go. We got Blitzbullet versus Spinaltap. Uh, Two people I remember quite well. We'll talk about that. But both of these chess players went on to become quite substantially better than me. I remember them in their youth. And Spinaltap, IM, international master, competed as youth, won national tournaments. Blitzbullet, ironically, didn't perform quite as well as Spinaltap. Didn't become an IM, but also became significantly stronger than me, strong master, but significantly better at Bug House and Crazy House, and very quick, very talented, very quick thinker. So I thought this would be an interesting match to stream because it might be a little bit of a clash of styles, and you'll see why Blitzbullet is a strong favorite to win, even though Spinaltap is generally a stronger over the board player and a little bit of the aggressive style. Although here it looks like Spinaltap sacks a piece right away for the hole. So going off of the clash of styles, Blitzbullet, more aggressive tactical player, but it looks like that sacrifices, I guess, relatively sound. He gets to pick the knight back up, and you get a d5 opening. Blitzbullet just closes the hole, and so Blitzbullet has a bishop off the board, fianchettoed king, and three knights versus three bishops. I'm not sure, if this is book or preparation, um, but maybe Spinaltap has gained a small advantage in the opening. Hard to tell. So try to get some, good commentary. I mentioned that good chess commentary, you really have to talk nonstop. I mean, you don't have to. You could just let the board speak for itself. So I'm just trying to adjust myself to give some live commentary. So Blitzbull is very solid here. Spinaltap, whether he could get that knight on d7 and c6 active, may be difficult. So it could be that if he can't rework those knights to the king side, that Blitzbullet will be able to turn this into an advantage. But the same thing with the pawn structure. The black pawns are more forming a base to directly attack towards the white king, as where the d4 and c5 pawn would be more slower in attacking. Although you could consider going straight in. So at this point, it looks advantageous for Blitzbullet, still even material, but Spinaltap is extremely good at limiting his opponent's ability to get the material that they need. So, obviously here he has a huge opening on h7, just placing a bishop there, and he could pick up the pawn on g6. So he decides to go straight for the queen sack, and now you have four knights versus three bishops and the queen. So it could be that you'd have to look at that decision. Maybe he had no good way to stop the bishop placement at h7, and just decided to sack the queen. Unclear. Blitzbullet is a substantially quicker player. Spinaltap was never known for. I mean, he's could be a decent quick player, but saying speed wasn't his exceptional strength. So you'll see if the time pressure could turn into an advantage. The queen off the board, sometimes in these situations, the queen off the board could be somewhat like a liability, because you got to be careful with the queen. And if there aren't too many good squares to place it, it could be like a liability because you don't want to lose it, and therefore you can't place it. And then Spinaltap might be able to work around. I mean, the pawn on g6 is hanging, but then the pawn on e2, for the fork. So pretty dynamic position here. Um, you know, it's questionable. Blitzbullet has the queen off the board and a knight, so there could already be checkmates coming out of the air. Plus the bishop, b3 could take on d5 and get a second knight, and Spinaltap is unlikely to be able to turn a quick attack, and that looks like it's going to be a smothered mate. Or no, it's not a smothered mate. He needs another knight. So if he takes the other knight, the queen on g8, and then if he takes with the knight, he needs another knight to place there. So he takes the knight like that, and it looks like that might be GG. He has to take with the pawn. If he takes with the rook, he'll have smothered mate, so he has to take with the pawn. But then blitzbullet could probably just play pawn at g7 and knight at h5. So this looks like all she wrote, and blitzbullet is going to get the first game. So this is just smothered mate. So you have to check. Blitzbullet is a strong favorite. So the interesting clash of styles. That Spinaltap's more defensive, even call it materialistic style, is not optimal for Crazy House. And you're usually a little better off going for the attack, sacking the material, and so blitzbullet is definitely, you can see the rating, 200 point rating different, probably favorite to win 6-2 or something like that. Spinaltap going for the d4 openings. Here he goes for a queen's gambit, which obviously has the weakness of the d3 square that could place a pawn or anything right away inside. So he's probably just going to run for the castle, and blitzbullet will just grab that pawn, and maybe he tries to work with a weakness right away, trades a little bit more material. It's unclear, this position, probably pretty equal. Actually white has some pretty serious threats, taking on f7, taking the knight, but the fianchettoed king there with the pawn still on e7, the two bishops there is relatively safe, and the knight and pawn off the board. It's unclear if he could do anything immediately, and the king, is the king safer castled or in the center? You have an immediate pawn at h3, so knight at e5, knight at e4. I'm not sure, just want to trade that knight on c3, whether the strategy of that, attack f7. Obviously he has the other knight on f6 coming, so that was a threat. So I guess he missed the threat of pawn at d2. That was a pretty serious threat. It would have just been a rook for a pawn, so he decides to give up the queen a second game, and the king in the center. So just c5, crash open the d file. It's looking pretty strong for black. It's not GG yet, because as I said, sometimes the disadvantage of having a queen off the board, that if he can't get other material to work together with the queen, and there's not really a good place to place the queen, that sometimes you could turn the position around and take advantage with the pieces versus the queen. So if blitzbullet can't come up with a strategy quickly, so he just goes for a pawn at b4. Is that enough? If he just brings the knight back, e2, d1, e2 here. So is this a serious threat with the bringing the rook in? It could be Spinaltap is actually okay here. It's tough to know, but now there's a time factor. So Spinaltap probably want to use his time here and come up with a plan. So just snap off that bishop, open up the king a little bit, so he makes a double trade, which is a little bit risky. Same with the queen off the board, those pieces could turn into checkmate very quickly, and bishop threatening to take on d4, and possibly place on c3, or the knight pin on the queen file with a knight on e4 could turn into a very quick checkmate. However, pawn at g6 is extremely powerful, and the pin with the bishop, and pin and win. So if you tried like rook takes bishop, or a defensive move, if blitzbullet can't turn an attack here quickly, this could be a powerful attack. Although also it could be Spinaltap doesn't actually have any mate threats. Um, that right here, that now he has the rook also, so it's more likely to have mate threats with the rook and a pawn. And I don't see anything quick and direct here. He's got two bishops, a knight, and a queen, and it's unclear. Just throwing a bishop down check. Uh, so he just takes the pawn, and his relative safety. So he sacrifices the pawn on f7 right away. I'm not sure, um, the benefit of that. If what he would have done if just rook takes, if he would have played bishop at d3, where he had a different strategy. But yet now he has, just knight at e6, threatening knight takes rook check, and then bishop at um, g8 might already be a mate threat. So he actually looks safe here. So I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe Spinaltap pulls off a win here, but we'll see what actually happens. He could consider placing at f4 even, if that or e3 because of the knight. And actually, Spinaltap has the time advantage here. So this is looking quite good for Spinaltap. Knight takes rook and bishop at g8 is probably mating, because he has the knight at e8 combined with rook at h7 threats, and if he sacks the queen, so he just gives up the. Well, he didn't give up the rook because there's nothing to take it back, but he could take the queen for nothing now, and now he has to place the queen down, and now Spinaltap is a very significant lead in material, so he just places the rook down on c8. He could have considered something like at e6, bishop at e6 or pawn at e6. He probably doesn't want to give up that rook with check. Whether he just brings the rook back to c1, whether he brings it up to c7, or what's going to happen if he places at c6. It'd be like a rinse and repeat if he uses another pawn. Does he want to sacrifice the knight? And blitzbullet doesn't have that much material, so Spinaltap probably doesn't want to overthink and get in time trouble here. He wants to be careful. He wants to bring home the win here, but okay, so he goes for it and he brings the rook back, but I'm not sure about that. I mean, he might have to take on g5. What's he going to do if he just gives up the knight back? So I guess he takes, but so now he has the two knights that are unclear how we could use them. What if he just takes the knight on f7? It still looks good for Spinaltap, a significant material advantage, although the material is mostly off the board. So now at this point, just two knights and a rook off the board. What happens if he just takes the knight? Then he's only got three knights off the board. What Spinaltap's going to do? Maybe he could try bishop at e6. If that were bishop at e6, or it didn't have to be at e6. Bishop at b3 is just as good, because knight to take bishop is a check threat. He could now do bishop at e6, and this is looking extremely good for Spinaltap. I'm going to predict that he's going to be able to put him away here. So let's see what happens. Just a minor threat. You can't even take the rook. So nice, clever trick that he gets the rook with check, but he's probably okay. Just move towards the knight, and Spinaltap, blitzbullet just has a very little material left, and Spinaltap has major threats. Mate imminent if he allowed it. So probably just take that knight, and it's unclear the threat that blitzbullet has here. So looks like it's going to be GG, but so just the double knight check. I guess he should probably just take the queen, but he can consider knight at f7. But taking the queen is probably safe. Just the bishop, it's unlikely that he could do anything. So just take the rook, and he didn't even take the rook. But he's got so little material. If he took the rook, maybe bishop takes knight with check. But now he's going to pick up that last knight, and blitzbullet with just a knight and bishop and pawn off the board to place. unlikely could do anything. So you're just going to run, and it looks like it's going to be GG. Just move up and attack the bishop. Uh, he's probably safe. I might actually. I don't know. That could be ugly. Did he mess this up? Yeah, I think he messed this up. This looks mating, and then he could have he could. No, I guess he's still safe. He's one pawn short of mating. So it was risky, close there. That I think he was. I'm not going to do a computer analysis or much into this, but this should be easy to put him away. He's got no material left, and he's got all the material off the board. So good job, Spinaltap. Gets a quick win. So let's see. We get d4, d5. So blitzbullet going for d4 with his whites. Unclear that why he's not playing e4. But he won the first game, and Spinaltap going again for this knight sacrifice on g3, and so blitzbullet pops the knight right back down with the fork threatening g7 and g3. So it looks. I'm not sure if this is book. So I don't know what Spinaltap's ideas here. If he's going to retreat the bishop and give up g7, and then could be bad because that bishop is just going to come to h6, or if he's going to castle and give up the knight, then he's down a lot of material already, and it's unclear. So if this isn't book, this could just be an opening blunder. That knight fork looks pretty deadly. So although he does get the knight, cornered there in the corner, this is a significant amount of material to be down. That blitzbullet has 4 pieces for 2 pawns. So I guess he has to go for the castle. Knight takes g6 is probably too risky. So just go for the bishop down defensive. He's got a 4-piece advantage for 2 pawns, and there's no material off the board to place. So that Spinaltap does have some serious structural damage around blitzbullet's king, so that could be quite powerful. That see what happens, and maybe Oki's streaming also. So I guess Oki's not streaming, but so not a huge turnout watching. Only a handful of people watching. This is for the finals. So one of the 2 players here, chess. At the end of the day, it's kind of zero sum, and on friendly there can only be one. So one of these players will advance to the finals, and one will be knocked out. Blitzbullet, a heavy favorite there, and now rather interesting. It went back to almost even material. Blitzbullet now is up 2 pawns, and so he sacrifices 2 pieces for 3 pawns, and but Spinaltap actually has probably still more serious structural damage near blitzbullet's king than around his king. He only has a knight to place, so sacrificing on f6 is probably premature, and Spinaltap was able to keep the pawn on h4 for these weaknesses. So actually I kind of prefer Spinaltap's position here. I'm not sure about the sacking those 2 pieces back. He's up 4 pieces, and now it's close to, it's not quite even material because blitzbullet is up 2 pawns. He does have 3 pawns off the board. Can Spinaltap come up with something to do with the weakness? And so he places a bishop at h6, threatening e3, and obviously if he took with the knight, that was pinned to the queen. So blitzbullet just places one of those pawns that he had on f4 to defend e3, forward, as opposed to on f2 or e2, d2, placing it more aggressively. So now Spinaltap has placed all of his pieces again, and is just attacking the weak pawn on b2. Blitz bullet could consider just rook b1 to defend the pawn, or does he have a strategy to use? So he takes the knight now. He probably has to take the queen. And he doesn't have to, but if he takes the knight, then there's going to be pawn at g5. So here he takes another bishop. I guess we could take with the pawn also, but then a knight would pop right down on e6. So Spinaltap has a knight and a queen. Yeah, I mean, bishop knight at f3 looks extremely dangerous. So Spinaltap just plays bishop on h3, and you see if he did bishop takes bishop, that there would be, I'm not sure if I could get some arrows going, but the knight at f3 probably would have been mating, although unclear. He might have been able to run to g2. And so here, blitzbullet sacrificing 2 pawns in order to get a tiny bit of play. And like last game, the material advantage, it's actually still pretty close material. So now you have 4 pieces for 2 queens. Spinaltap with the knight and queen off the board, which is dangerous, could be mating threats right away, as where blitzbullet's attack might be a little bit more slow, although the king is in a little danger. Does he want to give the rook for 2 pieces? Maybe. I mean, you see, interesting, if he did the rook for 2 pieces, then the knight and moves up, and then a bishop, and so if he takes the knight and then he plays the knight here, if he moves back up, it could be interesting. Is there a mate? Can he run his king back up to take the knight? Does he use the rook? Can Spinaltap's king find safety here on g5 in such a line if he tries playing knight to h5? And so blitzbullet makes a defensive move. So Spinaltap not with much time, but so just takes the bishop, and there's the threat at e6, so he takes back with the knight. I mean, it's almost scary if he took with the bishop, and so this looks GG. Spinaltap only has a few seconds, but this looks extremely dangerous for blitzbullet. He only has a few diagonals, and he's down a significant amount of material, although it's similar that he doesn't have material on the board. So, blitzbullet, you can see all the material that Spinaltap has off the board. Spinaltap, it's unclear, does he this check, just take, if he runs a bishop here, he's got to be careful about the queen. So does he have more safety running up? He probably has to run up the board as opposed to down the board, because the knight picking up the queen. Can the king find haven on b7? So if he, at this point, it's not possible anymore. He has to go up the board. So bishop check is the only check left. If he does the knight back, can he threaten to take f5 here and then run the king back this way? Spinaltap has clear mate and 1 threats. He could try bishop. He could try moving his own bishop. Then he could probably just move his king up if he plays bishop there. Probably just anything that he does, it could be that king h4 is just going to be a safe haven. So if he tries knight check or bishop check or pawn there, that king h4 might be GG. So a little surprising. So it looks like just king h4, and I don't see how blitzbullet stops mate. Just queen at h2. I mean, you could try bringing the rook up or something, but then just pawn, and probably just rook, rinse and repeat. So he even resigns. So yeah, I mean, he could have just rinsed and repeat, rook down. So Spinaltap goes off to a 2-game lead. So yeah, God forbid. Thanks for monitoring the chat for me, John. Surprising, Spinaltap here is pulled off upset. I'm saying, like, he's obviously the international master, more accomplished over the board player. In fact, I would not be surprised if Spinaltap makes Grandmaster in the next few years. In fact, I predict that Spinaltap does become a Grandmaster. As where your Blitzbullet, he probably could become a title player if he really worked at it, but it's unlikely because the payoff for doing the work is relatively minimum. Saying the payoff for becoming a doctor or something is much stronger than the payoff for becoming a title chess player. But Blitzbullet, is substantially better. Pug House, Crazy House, clearly for years one of the top Pug House players, maybe currently the top Pug House player rated in the world. But definitely from the top 5 Pug House players in the world currently. In Crazy House, ranked wise, clearly in the top 10 in the world. So is a heavy favorite. Although there is a clash of styles that Blitzbullet, precision play versus the computer, saying he makes mistakes. But Crazy House is a difficult game. And so when you make mistakes, usually your opponent can't capitalize on the mistakes because it's almost impossible to make all these calculations. So Spinaltap has been going for these sacks on G6, and the same thing again. So Blitzbullet here goes for the fork with the bishop between the knight and queen, and he takes the queen, takes the bishop back, and then Spinaltap just has this really powerful hold right on G6. I don't know if this is preparation. This is a smothered mate threat. If he goes to H1, he could consider going to F1 or taking the knight. So he takes the knight. So there is a mate in 1 threat. It's unclear whether he could consider pawn at H7 or just a safety type move. So looks like he just plays bishop at F3 and pawn at G2 is the logical move. He could defend with knight at G3, but likely he'll just take twice and then leave Blitzbullet with only a bishop and a queen that actually would have been mating. So in that case, I've been wrong. So if he had played bishop takes pawn, that probably would have been mating because take takes king there, then bishop at H3, and if he took the bishop, queen at G4 would have been checkmate. So knight at G3 was the only defense. So like if Duvid was playing, I probably would have fell for that mate. Spinaltap, a stronger player than Duvid, sees that and defends with knight at G3. And but how is Spinaltap relatively safe? Both kings are extremely dangerous, and he can't take the knight on D6. That would be mate if he takes the knight here, because pawn here and then a rook there, rinse and repeat. With the queen that he would win would be checkmate. So this looks extremely dangerous for Blitzbullet. This would be a huge surprise if Spinaltap pulls off a win here and upset against Blitzbullet. But maybe he did some preparation, or maybe, as I said, it's just a clash of styles. If these sacrifices on G3, G6 was preparation. So Spinaltap uses his pawn just to defend by placing at H7, and I guess he takes that. He'll probably just try to find safety with the king on H8. So he trades the knight off first, and this looks mating. This looks good. This looks GG. So it looks just rinse and repeat. Rook at G8 and another pawn at F2, and it's GG. He has to sacrifice the queen, and so Spinaltap off to a 3-1 lead. Very impressive. Variance only. I was surprised that variance only beat Blitzbullet. Maybe Blitzbullet has just been busy with other things or didn't prep. Although does he have mate here? He still has to mate him, but it looks extremely menacing, and the reality is that Blitzbullet does not necessarily even have an immediate mating attack. Maybe with the extra knight and the knight at E2 that he could consider. So he just takes the bishop because I think a rook at H1 in the previous position would have been a mating threat, because take with the bishop, and then he would have had knight at e2 at the end. So he just takes the pawn on g2, and so material wise, actually, Spinaltap is only up 2 rooks. So he is up 2 rooks here, and has one, but off the relatively the material is actually close to even. Um, but Spinaltap's attack looks much more menacing. It's possible he had a mate there, so it's possible that, he doesn't want to let his time tick down. So it looks like there's a relatively safe defense. Um, he doesn't really even have. He just resigns. It didn't look like he had anything like a rook check. So wow, Spinaltap going up 3-1, very impressive. Not sure this is his prep. So now blitzbullet going for e4, and surprised that he didn't do this from the beginning. Are we going to see a French, or he didn't take the knight right away? And this is usually book type lines, taking the knight right away. I think even last year's World Championship, you had some lines with d6 and then d5 taking the line. These are book lines. I assume Spinaltap, both players probably know these lines reasonably well. I think taking with the bishop might be more common. Placing the knight immediately at e3. I'm not sure, if the goal, if he's going to play, d4 and e6. So Spinaltap plays e6 to prevent. So he sacrificed a piece for a pawn. So interesting. I was mentioning this clash of styles in Spinaltap. Usually, the more materialistic, cautious player here has been sacrificing a piece. I think almost every single game, Spinaltap has sacrificed a piece right at the opening of the queen pawn games against blitzbullet's fianchettoed bishop. He's been sacrificing on g3 or g6, and here, like Alekhine French defense, sacrificing that knight is also very common. I've never seen this setup here. The 3 knights there. It's unclear how good this is, how to evaluate the position. Is just, can he just take the pawn here? I don't know what would have happened if he just took the pawn there. It might have been a trap. It might have been bad to take, but just it looked like the pawn was hanging. But maybe the king is a little barren there. With the being able to play something on d7, so Spinaltap decides to bring his queen out, and Spinaltap, a very clever player, and would notice the type things about the possibility of blitzbullet being able to get the material that he needs. Maybe he would even be considering castling queenside and saying the typical, like sack sitting. Would he actually be able to get a pawn that he needs for a6? And like obviously he's got 2 knights on this pawn, so the simple queen h5 defended the pawn there. If he forces the queen trade, he's going to bring the bishop out, and that would indirectly defend the pawn. If he just plays bishop e7, there would be a pin. So he takes, and now he takes the pawn. So now unclear the advantage that Spinaltap had. Like as I mentioned, why he didn't just do knight takes pawn the move before trading the queens here. Now there's the queen check. He could consider queen at d7, but just rinse and repeat, unlikely. So he queen at c6, and I guess the idea would have to be that if he does queen takes knight, that he's going to play rook d8 and take the file with the rook and menace the queen, or I guess even bishop c5 first. Menace the queen. There's that f2 square. So good, possibly good thought. Does he want to take the queen right away? So here, if he plays king f8, then the knight would come here and fork and just be able to pick off the bishop. So he has to play king e7. He could have considered taking one of the knights first and then playing king e7, but I guess that that knight, he's not going to retreat the knight, so he could take the knight at a later time. But now if he takes the knight, he'll be able to take back with the pawn. But also he could possibly bring this rook to the d8 square. So as said, Spinaltap is very clever and very attuned to such things like the inability of the opponent to get the material he needs to continue the attack, like a type sack sitting type bug house player. Blitzbullet's a bug house player, as opposed to okay, so Oki not streaming. I did send Oki the link, so Oki was welcome to join in for dual commentary. And thank God we got I got a minion here, got 10 people watching. I see in the chat some of my other viewers. Most of my YouTube viewers are not chess players. I have some, actually, Blitzbullet is one of the very first people over 10 years ago that I put chess on my channel. But the majority of my YouTube stuff is non-chess. But we'll see if some of the Crazy House community watches this. You're welcome to comment, or even to drop the link in the chat if someone is a chess commentator and wanted to join in the commentary. So it's a pretty unclear position. So he just moves the queen, and he decides to take the knight. So it's unclear what would be the advantage if he had taken the knight before moving to e7. Then there would be a knight there, but because he waited, now there's a pawn there. But it said that now Blitzbullet needs a knight for another check, and even if he had a knight at g7, if it's unclear directly how threatening that is. It's interesting, because bishop takes knight, and then he could pick up the queen. But he probably doesn't want those trades right away because he doesn't have a continuation. If he just bishop takes knight, knight takes bishop, and then taking the queen, he could probably just take back with the bishop, and it's going to be more dangerous for black here. So Blitzbullet sacrifices his queen. He could consider placing a pawn here first, and he probably has to retreat with the knight. So it's unclear how great, that now he's giving. He has the mate in one threat. So I guess he could pick up the knight and bring the queen back. So it's actually even material. So if you look at the position here, no, I'm sorry. Blitzbullet is up a piece, 2 pieces. So it's 5 versus 3 pieces. This looks extremely menacing. Just the queen at f1 is it may not actually be a mate threat, but it's extremely menacing. But maybe he could nibble away. So he just goes for queen at g8. So he probably couldn't. He just has to run. So I guess he does the bishop check first to defend. He already had defense against the knights. Here, if he does knight at e4, whether he'd sacrifice, whether here he just wants to run up and he loses on time. So it was an interesting game. It could have carried on, but this game Spinaltap lost on time. So I said, like the general pattern that you would expect would be that Spinaltap would be the one in time trouble. Blitzbullet is an extremely fast player, but the first few games that wasn't the case. So in this case, the typical strategy you might think that would work in these matches, where Blitzbullet would be the one running Spinaltap down on time, you saw manifest in that last game. So here we get a similar d4 line, and instead of allowing the knight sacrifice on g6, Blitzbullet trades it off right away. We might still see the sacrifice on g6, but I think this is slightly different variation than before, where Spinaltap had sacrificed on g6. So here, both castled kings on the king side, Blitzbullet the fianchettoed bishop. But Spinaltap has the advanced pawn anchor on e4 that right now is hanging. So does he have some sort of way to attack, or does he try to defend the pawn? Does he even have a good way like knight at f3? Is that even worthwhile? Or can he say that it's not worth picking up a pawn e4? Does he want to play knight at h4 and go for pressure on g6 for the sacrifice that appeared to work in the last few games? You could even consider taking the pawn on d5. What would he even do with it? Um, or sacrifice on h6. A lot of possibilities. Queen takes knight. None of those look so enticing, so he just plays knight at f3, safety move, defending the pawn, and now it looks like he's just going to give up the pawn on e5. Blitzbullet decides to, his pawn on d5 was hanging, so if he took the pawn and so just defend it. So Spinaltap has to come up with something and not just lose the pawn, so he sacrifices the piece. If he tried to go in for the attack like pawn there, he just doesn't have any more material. So he just anchors his pawn, and he has the strong dark pawn chain here leading in, and so just put it to Blitzbullet. What are you going to do with that extra piece? Does he really have? You could do something simple like bishop at e4. So he just places on a dark square around the king, and do we see a shuffle maneuver? So he's got the queen and bishop battery on the knight. So if he had taken the knight, he may have taken that knight first to have the double threats. And so now Spinaltap has gained his piece back, but he is down a pawn, which is 2 pawns. So this looks good for Blitzbullet. His king looks relatively safe with the 2 bishops, and Spinaltap doesn't have pawns to work with. Can he make a threat? He has the bishop and the knight. Does he have a threat to develop here? So he decides to just go safe. But Blitzbullet is just up the pawns. Does he think he has something to go in for the attack, or does he just want to place pieces and so he aggressively places the pawn on e4? So it's kind of like a flip in position where Spinaltap had the the central e pawn thrust, and then we had now like a reverse of positions where now Blitzbullet has the central e pawn thrust, and to say this looks relatively good for Blitzbullet. It doesn't look like Spinaltap is going to be able to maneuver his pieces to get advantage, so he decides just to sacrifice a piece. And like at this point, it's coming kind of all or nothing. That if he played defensive, so the hole on e6 is dangerous. If he had taken with the pawn, just bishop there and could have picked the pawn right back up, or if he did the queen trade first, that so he doesn't take the knight, and he works with with the white square pawns on e4 to f3, which strategy is going for. Although Spinaltap using that bishop he placed on h3 that was looking defensive, but was also eyeing the e6 square. But at the same time, Blitzbullet's king is relatively safely. We saw the other game. I think that was game 2, where Spinaltap won with a similar type strategy with the the threats of at f7 and a bishop at f7, or even knight threats. So a pretty dynamic play here. So Spinaltap decides he doesn't have anything directly to play for, so he just places the bishop defensively, maybe try to pick up the knight for an attack. So here it's unclear if these knights, these 3 knights are almost mating. If he could just do pawn at g7, he's a pawn short for the typical knight attack. But in Spinal, this is what you would have expected to see. Blitzbullet with huge time advantage. But he decided not to go for pawn at g2 right away, and the knight at g4. Now he's going for it, and but he doesn't have the other knight for the mate. So just king back. If he he could try. Okay, so he just sacrifices the queen, and that's probably GG either way. So blitz bullet. Those last two games were probably what you would have expected to see. Like close games, interesting games, back and forth, with Spinal Tap getting into time trouble, and maybe Blitz Bullet putting them away with the advantage of time trouble in the clutch situation. So very impressive that Spinal Tap, just to be able to win 3 games like that, and now the score is back to even, and we have this same opening that we saw 2 games ago that seemed to go pretty well for Blitz Bullet. So he sacrifices the knight in a different manner this time, which has actually been a theme here. This knight sacrifice on G3. This time wasn't because of the fianchetto, and so this actually looks pretty strong. How does he defend the rook? So I'm not sure if this is prep. I mean, does he? I mean, because now his knight is hanging also. I mean, he could consider playing something like knight at e2, but then he could just take the rook and rinse and repeat and put a pawn at h7. So he has the pawn there. So I guess he decides he has to bring his king up to defend it. So that's pretty clever. That king up there looks like the stronger defense. So Spinal Tap only has a pawn. He has sacrificed a piece, so he grabs the bishop there, and Blitz Bullet picks off the pawn right away. That pawn on g2 is very dangerous, so he decides not to allow him to fortify that pawn on g2. And we saw Spinal Tap was able to win some games there with that permanent, outpost pawn in Blitz Bullet's king side. So what's going to go on here? Does he sacrifice the queen for the rook, or possibly even the knight? Does he have a move with the bishop? Is something like bishop takes pawn? So pawn at e2. Very interesting. Obviously threatening the queen. That he could either just turn into a queen or knight with check. So he almost has to take that. He probably has to take the rook first. I'm not sure what the idea here is. I mean, he takes the knight, and I guess he's threatening on the queen. So if he takes his queen, he's gonna take his queen back. There's substantial threats here, so this looks quite good for Spinal Tap. He's relatively defended. Queen at c7 is his best attacking idea, although it's unclear what type of follow-up he has. So he just plays a knight to defend even b7 there, and he could have played the queen for like a rinse and repeat. He probably he would have taken b7 then, and if he got him to place the queen, then his king would have been relatively safe. So Spinal Tap wants to keep his queen off the board to have immediate mating threats. We mentioned the earlier games. Queen off the board is very powerful to have immediate mating threats. Here he probably can't take the bishop, but the placing at e4 is very dangerous. So he can't take the bishop, although now Blitz Bullet with just pure mating threat. He can't play knight c6 to defend. Actually, he can play knight c6 if he wants, but then he would be, his rook would be hanging. So maybe he has to play bishop at e7, or does he even attack? Does he, can he go for something here? So he has a whole minute here. These are the time pressure type things where you would expect to see, this type Blitz Bullet pulling ahead on time, but relatively Spinal Tap has quite a bit of time, and can he come up with something here? He has 2 pawns. It's probably not enough. Like the main squares are covered, and so he could probably take the rook. So if he takes the rook, is that mate? So what is Blitz Bullet going to do if Spinal Tap just takes the rook? Can he go forward with his attack and then give so he takes the rook? It looks like that's what he had to do, and So he can't. I mean, he can't play knight to c6 because the at d7 is just checkmate. He can't push the pawn, so he really has to place from the material. So he places his pawn. So if he had hoped to place a rook or something, so at this point, um, what's the idea? I mean, he could try bishop takes pawn, then he's got knight check and king, and it'll be bishop takes bishop, or maybe he think of a rook check. So blitzbullet allows him the counterplay, so he has been able to place his queen. So now with that extra move that he plays the knight, now he can no longer play knight at g7, so he takes the bishop. So interesting that blitzbullet here plays the knight, because you see the threat was knight at g7 after bishop there, so we could take with check, and so now so he could run up. So if he so he probably has to run up. He doesn't have to run up. I mean, he could go back king to e7. If he runs up, he's going to lose the knight. So he could, and also if he takes the bishop, he's going to lose the knight also. So he has to run up. He didn't have to run up. I mean, he could have ran back, and it's unclear whether he had a mate. He did pawn there, and whether Spinaltap could have went for the mate. So I'm not sure. Just a quick look at the computer analysis there. If even at the end, so we're seeing. So yeah, so taking the bishop there was bad. And you see, he actually had mate. So Spinaltap did have mate, and at this point, that's mating. So Spinaltap did have substantial advantage. So yeah, bishop knight at g3 was a substantial mistake, but Spinaltap was unable in the time pressure. So as I said, this is kind of what you probably would have expected to see in these matches, that blitzbullet would develop a time advantage, and in time pressure would be able to pull off a win in a close game, with possibly something like that where Spinaltap actually had a win, but due to the time pressure wasn't able to find it. So that's kind of as predicted. So now at this point, blitzbullet is back in the lead 4-3, and Spinaltap needs a win here to stay in the match, and it's his white here. So if he doesn't get the win here, he's going to have black, and this e4. Surprising that blitzbullet didn't play e4 the first game, the first whites, and you see that Spinaltap got a win there with black, 2 wins with white and a win with black, and then the last time he lost with white. So Spinaltap needs this win here. He's got his white, he needs his win, and we have a similar type blitzbullet with his fianchetto defense, and now Spinaltap has the f3 pawn maneuver, which has a different dynamic the last game. Spinaltap lost to the white squares penetrating through f3, so it's unlikely that we're going to see that type dynamic this game. So does he just slow play it? This is a typical Spinaltap d4 type position, and so what's he going to do? So he just develop his pieces, slow play it. There's really not much magic for quick attacks or sacrifices. We saw in the other games sacrifices were pawn structure, long-term pawn structure advantage, like a piece for a pawn, and the difficulty of placing a piece around long-term central pawn structures. So we'll probably eventually see something like that. So blitzbullet just playing on the queen side, kicking the knight is provoking weakness. Does he just want to play a3? We're going to see a3, a5, or does he actually have anything other than this? So we're seeing b4, and what's he going to do with the pawn anyways? Is the pawn going to go on c4? If they trade a pawn, is blitzbullet going to try to develop light square weakness through c4, or going to try to break open on the king side? So he just plays b4, and so take, and and so now he's taking on f4. So he takes with the bishop, not the pawn. So he could have considered taking with the e pawn, but he takes with the bishop, and maybe he was looking the pawn is better. He'd rather have a pawn on e4, e5 than the bishop, but with the pawn on g5. So does he go to g3 or back to e5, and then knight on f5? So if he put the bishop on g3, the knight was coming on f5. Does he want to snap that off with the bishop on h3? So blitzbullet has all his pieces on the board, and it's actually unclear what he would do with them. What his idea, and so Spinaltap just picks up the exchange. With the extra space there, this is going to win an exchange. So so now he even wins the queen. So Spinaltap just goes for the material grab. So blitzbullet's expansion of pawns on the queen side ended up costing him material. However, that you have the curse of the queen off the board, that it's hard to know what Spinaltap is going to do with the queen off the board here. So there's not really any good places for the queen. I mean, you could consider placing it on the queen side, even something like a6, just to win a pawn. Just places the knight off the board, but that immediately falls to the fork trick that just takes e3 and then places the pawn back for the fork. However, how good is it? Is the pawn better on g3 than h2? Is he going to play bishop at e6 first? But if he plays bishop at e6, maybe he's probably just going to take on d4 now. Yeah, so he takes on d4. He's threatening the c3 knight, and the g3 knight is still hanging. So Spinaltap just grabs a pawn with it. So he places that pawn right away on e7. He takes again. So interesting here. What do we have going on? Do we have knight at f7? Does he play knight at f2 right away? He didn't have a rook for or try gathering a rook for a smothered type threat. So just going for the fork threat on g3. So does he play rook? Does he take the rook on f8 with check? Does he play bishop takes knight, and then he could retreat the queen? He could try retreating the queen to e1, but he's just going to see an immediate something placed at f7. So he probably is going to end up taking the rook on f8. Maybe he plays bishop takes knight first, and then it's hard to know what he's going to do if he's just going to play at h2. He can't play at h2 because of smothered mate threat. So now he could play at f2. But then he's going to play bishop takes f2. So you assume bishop take f2 is going to be the move that he plays. So is that too slow? So maybe Spinaltap just plays rook at e8. So rook at e8, rook takes bishop is probably a mating threat, and also knight at e7. So he could consider something like it's unclear if Spinaltap is down to 6 seconds. So this is kind of expected what we were going to see with blitzbullet with a large time advantage at the end. But Spinaltap's a strong player. If he has a mate or a winning position, he'll be able to win with just the 2-second increment. 2-second increment is significant. So blitzbullet probably has to play a defensive move here. I doubt he has some sort of kill. Maybe he has something knight takes g3, so he goes for it. He's going to sacrifice more. He doesn't have. He needs one more knight. He doesn't have enough knights to just keep on sacrificing. So actually, that looked pretty dangerous taking the knight there because he needed that knight to defend e7. So now a defensive move like maybe bishop at e7. But actually, I think that was pretty dangerous what he did, and then even something like pawn at e6. So this is looking pretty good for Spinaltap. He might pull off a win there. You see there that he needed that knight to defend e7. And yeah, so maybe this is mating. Um, so can he just run? He has the other rook there. So I mean, the rook is rook is defending. You know, if he just plays king g8, if he just pawn there, um, pawn there. I mean, I don't know if king h1. I don't even know what the threat is. If he just takes it, and the bishop takes pawn, um, and queen back, but it's not much of a threat. So I'm not sure what the threat is even. You know, you could just this looks GG for Spinaltap. So wow, crazy game there. Good job. You know, Spinaltap needed the win. So did he take a break? So we see it's 4-4 rematch offer canceled. So I think they set a 2-hour time window. Um, so we'll see what's happening. Maybe just one of the players is taking a break. So that was a pretty interesting game there. And in the chat going on. So it's not a huge advantage. So Spinaltap just picking up the material there. It's not winning the queen. You see, it wasn't really a huge advantage from the computer analysis. And the knight here, like I said, he just walks right into that fork, and then blitzbullet. Even bishop at f4. They said it was better, because the bishop check and taking on d4. That but the pawn on e7 is powerful. So the evaluation here is pretty interesting. And pawn x knight, you see, so actually rook at e8 was much stronger. In fact, it's saying rook at e8 is basically GG. So it's interesting that rook at e8 was almost undefendable. In fact, it's saying that's mate in 7, so that's interesting. And then, so after taking back with the pawn, knight at f7, said he has to do the queen. And here, bishop at f2 looks stronger, but he goes for the material. And, so here it's saying taking the rook was a bad move. It looks like they restarted. And so he did actually have a mate. And even here, king at f1, so at f2, at f1, yeah, looks strong at f1, king there. And then, at king h1, and then he has, rook hits g2. So I actually missed that. So, here we go. They're back. And so blitzbullet going back for e4. So we have the same line again with the knights. I wasn't so sure about Spinaltap last time playing queen to h4. I mean, you saw last time that the pawn was hanging on d4, and he brought his queen out first and then took. So this time he just places the pawn back right away at d5 to secure the pawn outpost on e5, and you have h4, h5. So all the material placed on the board, blitzbullet up a piece for a pawn. So and just reworking the pieces. The knight on g6, you just the bishop on g6, you just snap it up and create open a file. He could rinse and repeat. That bishop could go straight on b7, and could have tried to win the exchange. But the threat of the bishop on f7 is extremely powerful, and especially because he could take on g6 afterwards. So the threat of bishop on g7 is followed by the fact that his pawn on g6 and e6 is hanging. This looks extremely dangerous and bad for Spinaltap. So yeah, he just probably has to sacrifice the queen there, and he's got a ton of holes. So there's nothing direct. So Spinaltap, I don't know the evaluation here. It's possible that he's okay relatively. He did sacrifice a queen for a piece, so now blitzbullet is basically up 2 queens for 2 pawns, and a blitz bullet just grabs a pawn back there. Um, Although this could be dangerous, saying it's even mating. If it was spinal tap one move, there that it could be that's even almost mating. So he takes the pawn back on e4, and the knight defending a drop on f2. He doesn't have two bishops. If he had something to play at f2 and g3, so just a huge material advantage. These holes, that he's got these pawns to play. So just pawn at f6, d6, or even just pawn right away at e7. So blitz bullet has a huge advantage here. Is it possible that Spinal Tap could come up with something? Even like knight at e3, it's very slow. Like knight at e3, it just doesn't look like he has much to go for here on the attack. I don't even have anything better to recommend than like knight at e3. And then you could probably just move his queen if you wanted to, or maybe even go directly in for the attack. So not looking good. So he just plays bishop at e7 as a defensive move, which isn't good. And he could just play a pawn at a7 if he wants. Or so he goes bishop at c8, the obvious threat of pawn at d7. It's probably even, maybe it's not mating. Pawn at d7 he could probably run. So does he play knight at e3 here? Because or he just preemptively runs. But blitzbullet just has such a huge material advantage. Like saying just castles here when you're going to place the knight. He just resigns. That so Spinal Tap really just getting spanked out of black from the e4 line. So blitzbullet going for the rook lift right away. That memes of the destruction. Good to see you. Okay, Oki there. I thought I gave Oki a wrench. I'm not sure. I thought I made you a moderator, Oki, but you don't need to ban anybody or anything like that. I don't ban people, but if someone makes a comment, you could delete their comment. But I don't like banning people. My internet had been going down occasionally, so if my internet goes down, hopefully I'm not going to lose the stream. So let's see what he just took the rook and placed it right back in the corner, and so this is interesting. I think this is even book. So can Spinal Tap make it into overtime? Like his black. He really has to. If he does make it into overtime, that his Alekhine or knight sacrifice on e4, just e5, he couldn't get anything out of that. So I don't know if he has anything better for e5 prepared for overtime. So can blitzbullet finish the match here? Relatively even position. Spinal Tap. A lot of times you want to place the rook. When I play against this, I usually end up placing the rook here on g3, and end up sacrificing it back pretty quickly. But the rook on a6, the rook on a7 is hard to attack, so it needs a piece. You could probably just move the queen here. Maybe just queen back to d1. They're saying this is like a Spinal Tap specialty of making it difficult for his opponent to get the pieces that he wants to do something useful. And draw wins here. So if he just plays queen e2, a repetition draw, because now the knight and bishop are double attacking e4, hence why he played queen to e2 to defend the pawn. So a draw by repetition would win the match for blitzbullet. So let's see. So he just takes the knight and takes back, and so now he has the threat on e4 and the threat on the knight. The knight, the rook eyeing this pawn here on c7, but but he doesn't have the queen to attack the knight. Um, but he could consider just queen e2 and threatening the knight, possibly because the knight uh, attack on c7, although maybe he could go in for that, and or maybe he just defends the knight. Queen at e2 is too slow, or saying rook takes on b7. It's unclear how good that is. um, so he just brings the other rook down and asks blitzbullet, what's he going to do? How's he going to defend that bishop? Is he going to move his queen over? So he doesn't defend the bishop, and he just decides to attack with at h3. So just simple bishop at f1, defensive move. So then he doesn't have any way to really increase the pressure. I mean, he could try like rook at g6 if he wants. So blitzbullet just places the rook back on b8, and so now we have, and maybe he just takes the pawn. So he opens up the rook. He could consider just taking the pawn, but maybe he was scared about the knight with the bishop eyeing it. So material is Spinaltap with a piece for 2 pawns. Although material-wise, blitzbullet does not have substantial development, and so he goes for the sack on f7. I'm not sure what his follow-up is here. That he's going to take the knight with the bishop and then try to bring his queen out or something. It doesn't look like he has enough material for an attack. Can he just place here? Does he just place on e5? So he just places on e5, blocks the bishop in. I have to say this looks pretty good for Spinaltap. It looks like we're probably going to see overtime. So AB, good night. Thanks for checking in. And so at a6, interesting move. I guess he just wants to kick that knight. How dangerous was the knight? And he was worried about, as said, that threat on c7. And but this looks pretty dangerous. And like, how serious is the threat if he just takes on d6, for example? How serious is a knight drop here? And rather than taking on d6 right away, to just threaten g7. So he goes back to f1. And knight at c7 is an extremely dangerous threat, and so he has to take that pawn right away. Hopefully I've been having minor internet issues. So we have the time issue again. Blitzbullet has to be Spinaltap has to be careful not to get into too difficult time pressure. The knight threat on f6 is extremely dangerous. So just pawn there. As long as Blitzbullet doesn't mess up his time management too badly, just pawn takes pawn looks winning. Knight at f6 is an extremely dangerous threat. He has to defend it. Pawn at e7, basically only defense. And so Spinaltap just giving up the knight. Should he take it? And if he takes the knight, he might even just take the rook right away, because there is a mate threat, and he just doesn't have much material. But he takes the bishop back first. He could have considered taking the rook right away and giving up the other bishop and just letting him move forward. But Spinaltap looks pretty solid here. So Blitzbullet just resigns. We got overtime 5-5. So if you look rating wise, Spinaltap has gained like 40 rating points. Saying Blitzbullet was a huge favorite, so very impressive. Although as mentioned, that Spinaltap has just been getting spanked in this line. So I guess he decides to leave the knight on f6 this time, because those previous attempts did not work out that well. He could consider something knight c6, e6. He wants to take the knight back. So should he? He doesn't want to play e6, because if he takes the knight, he wants to take back with the e pawn presumably. So we get the similar position, and you have to say that Spinaltap really didn't get any counterplay. And is this the third time we've seen this line, or the second time we played D4? But I think the second or third time the third or fourth time we're seeing this, and Spinaltap has not been able to get any counterplay in this line. So hopefully he'll be able to come up with something to make it exciting, and otherwise, uh, we might see blitzbullet cruise to an easy victory. So I'd have to say the last few games, Spinaltap has won with white much more closely than blitzbullet. Has basically been crushing, winning with white. So if it keeps on going on like this, you would assume it'd be more likely to see blitzbullet get a black win than Spinaltap. So he tries something different, and so he gathers the knight and places it right away. But he's down a piece now, so if, he's going to go for the sacrifice on G2 or something like pawn at F3. He's down a substantial amount of material. He's already sacked one piece for a pawn. Is he going to sack another piece for a pawn? But he doesn't have to. Like at F3, these are serious threats. And it's unclear how blitzbullet defends. What does blitzbullet do about G2? Does he have any good way to defend? And if he takes, and then bishop takes back, how serious are these threats? And also, the blitzbullet with open rook on the F file, how dangerous is that? So, just forking the knight and the queen, putting it straight to him. And he probably can't. Maybe he could take the queen. If he takes the queen right away, queen at e7 is an immediate mate threat because the knight is pinned, and it doesn't look like Spinaltap has an immediate threat. So he takes the bishop back, defending the mate threat by getting rid of the pin, but then he loses the H knight. So now Spinaltap doesn't have a knight. He does have this advanced pawn on e4 that is hanging from a knight threat right now. He could consider placing something at f3 like a pawn or bishop right away. It's unclear how dangerous is the pawn drop on d7, and so he chooses to play bishop at e7, and I guess pawn drop at e7. The knight on c5, but now just the advanced outpost of these pawns at f6 was the obvious reply that you would have expected here. So Spinaltap presumably knew the most likely move that blitzbullet would play would be at f6, and we saw this before that another game that that blitzbullet had won with a pawn on g7 and e7, and the mating attack on at f8 threat. So how slow is the attack here? That how big of a threat is even does Spinaltap even have? So he's got two knights also. So he do like knight at g7, then he and threat at knight at one of these squares. So I guess does he take the knight and threaten here? I guess he plays a rook check here first. Might as well. I don't know what the idea is. If he places the knight, was he going to take right away, and then go for knight at f3 or even h3 possibly? Most likely be f3, and even pretty dynamic game here. So Spinaltap, as I said, the other lines he didn't get any counterplay at all. He has some counterplay this time, although the material advantage is huge. That blitzbullet is basically up two queens for an exchange, and he has some mate threats. If he played king h1, that would have been mate, or even king f1 might have been. So he just takes the bishop, and he has his squares defended. So the knight drop here and here are temporarily defended. So he just takes the bishop, and so the mate threat is probably the queen drop and then the king up. That now have a knight drop threat on c5. So he takes the queen, but probably queen drop here and knight here, and if he can't really go king up here, so he just resigns. It's almost certainly mate with the knight on c5. So Spinal Tap just resigns plus the time pressure. So as I was mentioning, that okay, so message. So Blitz Bullets wins with white were more convincing than Spinal Taps. Spinal Taps wins with white were closer. So if this goes on at this point, Blitz Bullet is much more likely to eventually get a win with black than Spinal Tap. Although Spinal Tap did have more play and chances than in the previous attempts, but he was down a substantial amount of material there. So for that play. So I would assume Blitz Bullet has gotten really his E4 line just got him substantial advantage right at the opening, as where Spinal Tap's D4 line, although he's won the last two whites with it, have not been as convincing as Blitz Bullet's white win. Let's see if he could keep it going and give him one more chance. So Blitz Bullets here, a draw or victory for the entrance into the finals. Spinal Tap opens up the F file. C5, just sacrificing the pawn. What's the idea? What happens if he just takes it? What's he going to do with the knight? I don't know. So the idea is to play D4, and if he takes the pawn to take back with the bishop check and then king h1, how serious of a threat is that? So he decides not to take the pawn. I'm not sure what would have happened if he just played pawn takes pawn and then took back with the bishop and then king h1. Knight, he doesn't have a knight to a second knight to place there if he had another knight to place at f2, but he decides to allow it, and now he has the second knight. So king at h1, he would have been able to play a knight there, and he would have had to sacrifice his rook and the queen. So does he have to move his rook? Can he play pawn takes pawn? Is it too dangerous to take the pawn on g6? Then he's going to take the rook. It's going to be defended. Could be some serious threats. However, if he doesn't take the pawn on g6, he might not have the second chance. So if he plays rook at e1, I'm not sure what Blitz Bullet's idea. I mean, he might just play bishop takes f5, so he goes for it. And I would assume, he's going to be all in. He takes the rook here, and threatening to take on f1. Then you have the clever, when you have these positions here, that you have these clever rook at h1 drops, so that queen at f2, if queen takes rook, queen takes queen, then queen at f2, queen x queen, and then you have rook at h1 drops. You could take the queen with check. So if he tried something slow, like taking the rook, that extra tempo is probably mating, although it's unclear. So is he going to so knight check here? Does he place the knight? Does he move his knight? And what type of discovered check does he have here? That if he Spinal Tap plays knight here, and then obviously has to play king takes h7, he's going to have some sort of attempt at a check, but how good is it? can he play like knight takes pawn here, and can he somehow pick off the queen? Can he pick up the rook with check? Can he play like knight here and then knight back here, and try to pick up the rook with check somehow? So it has some play here. So he decides to place the knight instead of using his own knight here. As I thought, I was looking at possibly knight here for some sort of attacking the rook, but I'm just knight knight here would be pretty devastating, so he has to drop something. So at this point, if he played bishop at g6, then the king could safely go back to h8 without having an immediate check. So if he plays bishop takes bishop, so he uses the pawn, and so now what I said with the rook at h1 trick. So looks like you have queen takes rook, queen takes queen, queen takes f2, queen takes f2, and then rook at h1, king takes rook. So I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. Queen takes queen, queen takes the pawn, queen takes pawn, queen takes queen, rook at h1, king takes rook, knight takes queen, check, king g1, and then he could play rook at h1, and then a queen. So this looks mating. Well, he doesn't do it. I got to say that it had looked mating. I mean, rook here is a pretty serious threat. With queen takes bishop. So I think he had a simple mate there. Like I said, that queen takes rook, queen takes rook, queen takes pawn, queen takes queen, and then rook at a1. So now bishop here looks mating. So I think blitzbullet missed his mate, and now it's. I'll just look at the analysis board because it was hard to say that over. So blitzbullet misses. From what I saw there, it looked like a easy mate. So maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, just mate in 6 here. Queen takes f1, queen takes f1, queen takes f2, queen takes f2, rook at h1, king takes rook, knight at x, knight takes f2, king g1, queen e1. So it was a simple mate in 6 that he missed there. Like I was having a hard time saying it out, but I was pretty sure that was mate. So blitzbullet misses a simple mate and goes down, and we see another round of finals. So that's we could have put away the match there with even Duvid. Oh wow, I got my troll. So it looks like I'm losing the chat. I got I don't know exactly. These guys have actually been banned. I banned like 100 of these guys, and then I unbanned everyone because I really don't like banning people. But it looks like he came back and is trolling me. So whatever the case is, the chat wasn't that active anyways. But we got Joanna Miller. I forgot to share the post here, so sorry about the chat troll. I don't mind. Just let them troll me. Like I guess it is what it is. Like because the other mods the other day had like banned like 20 different accounts of whoever that is, and then I unbanned them all, and so he's back, or maybe he had new accounts anyways. So it could be that they're new ones, but whatever. It's tough. Tough. Unfriendly world out there. So it is what that is. So if there's mods there and you want to ban these guys, or if you don't care, there's not much of an active chat going on anyways. It looks like he didn't do that much damage. I'm not sure if I need to go offline for a second. Okay, so hopefully it's not any problems with the stream, but try to keep on going. And so Spinal Tap. Let's see what happened here. Your similar line, and this time Blitzbullet decides to take the knight on f6, even though he was having much more success. Um, the other lines, and although this also looks pretty painful. So can he just play? Bishop takes e3. So I mean, it looks like Blitzbullet has already accumulated a substantial advantage for white, and the amount of counterplay is unclear. And sorry about streaming there. So I get my chat trolls, but whatever. That's the price of streaming. You're more likely to get trolls than to get people who want to. Sometimes you get super chats and nice contacts, but usually things are about balance. So the negative energy that you require is usually proportional to the positive things that you acquire. So sorry about that, but so let's see what happens in. So unlike the other games where Spinal Tap went down a substantial amount of material, he is still down material. He sacrificed a piece for a pawn, so he at this point he's down more than a piece for a pawn. He got a queen, so this time Blitzbullet actually sacrificed his queen, and so Spinal Tap got the knight threat there, and he decided to sacrifice the queen, and then he got another piece. So unlike the other previous games that we had saw, this time Spinal Tap has the material advantage with black, and Blitzball's king is a little bit safer. I'm not sure. Can he just take c2 here? Should he just swipe the pawn? He could try knight at g2 or even knight at h3, or he could try to do something to safe in his king. So I guess he just goes for f6 to defend the pawn on g5, but then you have pawn at e4, e5 right away, which is extremely powerful. The king can't really find haven on the queen side because of knight check, and then pawn check on b7. So I'm not sure f6 benefited him. Maybe the square on f7 for the king would be a minor refuge, but so he just takes, and I'm not sure how much of a threat even Spinal Tap has. If so now the king has refuge on d7 because he took the pawn, he took the knight. So it's unclear. I'm not sure taking the knight was the right move. I think taking f6 was actually better because taking the knight opens up this square on c7. So I think Blitzbullet was actually better taking on f6 here, and then if he had taken on f6, then that opens the square for the knight on e5. He can't he couldn't have ran to the king side or the queen side, but he takes the knight, which makes sense. But now Spinal Tap seems to have found relative safety for his king on d7, although just with the queen and rook off the board, it's unclear what he's going to do with that. But here he just takes the knight. That this knight at g3 was probably a poor move because if he takes it back, that would have allowed a knight drop here, and so wow, Spinal Tap has some chances here to to win a game with black, although he has severe time trouble. So the normal type time trouble that you would expect to see between these two players. Um, possibly opening up for a knight on b3. So takes, and if he took with the pawn again, the knight on b3 fork, but he uses the advantage of the rook. Um, and Spinal Tap just has a huge material advantage. I think if he just takes with the pawn, um, can he find refuge? for his king, is he which way should he run? Like he has a lot of squares to go to. So yeah, I'm not sure if he had tried knight here or there. This looks pretty good for blitzbullet, but I assume he's got mate here. It looks like mate in one. Now he's got rook takes here. Would have been mate in one. So maybe he could have found refuge in a different way there, or maybe blitzbullet was won the whole time. So we got another last 3-3. The last 6-7 games have all been wins with white, and Spinaltap, as I said, blitzbullet had a mate in 6 last game and missed it. So the reason we had another overmatch series, it was overtime 2-game match, was because blitzbullet missed the mate in 6 with black. So let's see what happens this time. And as I was saying, that blitzbullet's wins with white have been much more convincing than Spinaltap's wins with white. But relatively, I don't even know who Jim Cornette is, so it's a pretty random troll to get that. This guy's trolling me with Jim Cornette. I think I looked him up because I had this troll earlier, and like Jim Cornette is some sort of like wrestler or something like that. But it was a rather odd, way to troll somebody. But I guess he took it easy on me. He just did it like 8 times as opposed to previous shows. I've seen him do it hundreds of times. So Spinaltap here, instead of castling, has went for an h4, and making it less likely that he's going to castle. So we had a previous game where Spinaltap had played f3, and blitzbullet had usually been fianchettoing the bishop, and so this time blitzbullet does not fianchetto his dark squared king bishop, and ends up with his bishop on g3. So Spinaltap goes for h4, the h5 threat, and so blitzbullet plays f6. Ben Feingold never play f6, but he did, and so f6 has the advantage of defending e5 and possibly providing a square for the bishop to retreat to. But this is looking good for white. They're just like, how does he defend e6 here? Does he bring the queen up to defend e6? So now he plays f5. So what does Spinaltap do? He just brings the knight bishop back, and what's he going to do? Is he going to castle? He's going to play knight g3. Does he have a way to exert more pressure? And then blitzbullet here with these kind of Spinaltap type bishops that are rather defensive. It's hard to turn those bishops into something aggressive, and so it looks like Spinaltap has got somewhat of an opening advantage here. Blitzbullet even here moving king to f8. He doesn't have anything to block. He doesn't want to bring the knight back to d8, so he just plays king f8. Takes shelter behind those bishops, but Spinaltap has a pawn off the board, and he just brings the bishop back. I mean, he could have considered something like at e5 or rook to c1, but he brings the bishop back. A little bit unclear why he did that. He's going to take on e5. Does it help him to take on e5? He's going to take on h5, and here he uses the pawn on g5. And now we have the reverse with the queen check, and now Spinaltap likely will have to play king f1. So it's an interesting mirror position, and so he's going to take on f3. So even sorry about that. So blitzbullet just sacrificing the bishop on e5 for the weakness on f3. He has a pawn to place there immediately. Does he just leave the bishop on d3? So it seemed a rather odd move bringing the bishop back here on d3. I'm not sure why he did that. It looked like the bishop was just going to get hit, and I'm not sure it wasn't threatening anything. So now you see that this odd bishop there on d3 that might be being punished a little bit for that move. And so blitzbullet just working with the white squares, even though it's not at this point directly pressure on the white king. F3 is wide open, but unclear what he could do with it. So he takes with the knight, not the queen. I mean, you would assume if he took with the queen, then he could have taken the knight with tempo, but the queen and bishop. I guess taking on F3, the other bishop would have landed on E4. So Spinaltap prefers this, just to limit the amount of material. So taking with the queen would have allowed knight takes F4. So Spinaltap is just limiting the material available to blitzbullet, which is probably a good strategy here. And now that he has the knight on F3, so he just grabs a pawn, and so very interesting here. So I mean, now Spinaltap, has counterplay. He's got both of them have files to work with. There's some threats. Bishop takes E7, E6 is a pretty serious looking threat, and or just pawn at D7. It's hard to say. There's a pretty dynamic position. I like Spinaltap a little bit here over blitzbullet, but it's hard to tell. And let's see what happens. So blitzbullet, tiny time advantage, almost fading away. It's tough to see what type plan does he have. Can he gather enough material? So he just goes at F5 instead of the threat of taking on E6 was too powerful. And so Spinaltap, just bishop there, takes a pawn, knight at D7, E7, extremely serious threat. He could just take this extra pawn again. So, he really had no choice but to drop the pawn to prevent the knight. So you just take the material, and then, blitzbullet has very little material to work with, only a knight. He could consider just, moving the bishop back again. So, bishop there, he has to take, because king up, knight here would be checkmate, so he has to take it. He probably take back. Okay, so if he'd taken with the rook, so now he takes with the knight, and he almost has to play king up. That looks like that was forced. The knight up, king up again, and he's just barely surviving. So bishop here, king here, knight there, checkmate. So blitzbullet wins the match. So interesting there. If going back a few moves, if so here bishop takes pawn at the so at F6, which is the poor move. He probably wanted to keep a material drain here. So here just saying knight at C6 was a more direct threat. Obviously, knight at C6 was probably more powerful, or just taking F3, and then at this point he's in serious trouble. So he had to take with so he's still surviving here. King G3, knight at F5. So he could have played king at H2, and then knight check, and we sacrificed the queen. So king here just walks into mate in 2, time pressure. So good match there. Got into overtime. So congratulations to blitzbullet, making it into the finals. Good luck in the finals. And if there's a lot of serious competition this year, so blitzbullet is actually one of the favorites, I would say, to even possibly finish in the top 3. I would assume if he worked at it that he's likely to be. There's a lot of strong players, the finisher and Saikon, you got Katask and whether Opperwiesen plays. So even to be in the top three, but blitzbullet is certainly in competition for the top three, and even to make it to play Jasugi for the world championship match. So actually, Spinaltap getting into overtime, getting 6 victories, was much better than expectations. You could see that he won 40 rating points in that match. So good job, Spinaltap. Great showing, and look forward to the finals. Maybe I'll stream a few of the matches, and have a great night, everybody, and take care.